Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us this evening. What we're looking at tonight is having a brief, sort of a very brief kind of presentation on Space Cadets and the GCSE that we run, and then I will get into the burning questions and the presentation that you're all here for, which looks at what telescope should I get. Essentially, and I know that I'm speaking to people who already know this because, so essentially Space Cadets is this website here. So it's www.spacecadets.co.uk. I've generally designed this for anybody of 7 years plus, and it's a precursor to anybody who wants to go into GCSE astronomy or similar. It's to give kids an introduction to astronomy and space, and it's about what it offers is an environment where they can complete digital interactives and finish off with the digital quizzes at the end. And there's also some videos in there and a few video lessons, kind of dotted through the program as they go. So what it is each of these modules, for the large part, at the end of the quiz, they can then download the certificate, print it off, and then it ends with they then have to have the single wing that they can complete the quiz on and download the certificate. That tests them on everything on the first module, and then there is the then they can go on to do what we call the golden wings, which is essentially where they go through all the. It's essential of last year's webinars, but where we've included quizzes in there too. So they've been tested on all that content. So when it gets to the golden wings, it's essentially a case of doing module one. There'll be questioning on module one again, and on the module two. And then if they complete that, then they get their golden wings. And just at the moment, we're offering a £50 discount to any space cadet who gets the golden wings, has completed all the modules, downloaded all the quizzes, and completed all the quizzes, I should say, downloaded the certificates, because I'll need to see those emailed to me, and then of course the single and golden wings, so then we can sort out the £50 discount on the GCSE. So that's essentially running for £8.50 a month, and that's corrected by Go Cardless. There is no contract to that. If you want to cancel, you cancel. But obviously, clearly, if you cancel it, then you're no longer eligible at that point for the £50 discount. You have to complete the thing in one hit. There are some niggles with the offer I'm looking at, which I won't discuss in the video, but that's essentially what Space Cadets is. And the webinars are continuing to run, as last week, for example. These aren't being tested, though, per se. I mean, there are competitions in them, and there are the opportunities to win prizes and things like that. So that's kind of the formats, and how it works with those is if you're not able to attend, we record it and then it's uploaded, and you can see that usually the following Monday. So that's pretty much how that works there. The GCSE Astronomy, and I will share that tab with you. This is this website for that. So it's onlineastronomycourses.co.uk, and that's essentially running for 2 years. And it's £310 for the 2 years, but payable on a yearly basis. So it's £155 for the first year, and then for the second year. And then that gives you access to the online portal. And in there, you get access to the digital material, some quizzes again, and also that the textbook is sent out to you as well. That also comes with free robotic telescope access. So we've teamed up with the John Moores. Sorry, the Liverpool National Schools Observatory, that's the one. Apologies to those guys if I've got that wrong. But you get a login to that, and you also get 24 access to the portal, email support with your course advisor, and the course optional webinars. And the webinars we've run 2 of these a month. So you've got the GCSE first year and second year, and these run on the penultimate and final Thursday of the month normally. We only really break for the month of August because everybody's on holiday then anyway. So what we do in those is we run them live, and we go through past exam paper questions covering particular topics as we go. And you email those with the invite a week before. And so once that's been completed, it's then uploaded to the portal, and you can view those as well as the other material that we have done. So that is my brief kind of plug. I haven't wanted to go into too much detail on it because that's not what people are in here. But obviously, clearly, part of the motive of this, as people can imagine, is also to try to help push these, because obviously, clearly, trying to keep these great projects going during what is proving some very tough times. Anyway, guys, I'm looking at the time and we're now heading for 10 past. So got a fair bit to get through, got a few things to show you. I must apologise if that door opens. I'm in my sitting room, although you probably can't see with the background there. And I've got my trusty dog down there. So please bear with me. So what I'm going to do now is stop this share. And I'm going to share the PowerPoint now. And then we can get on with that presentation. So let's go for share. Let's go for that. Ooh. Let me just adjust that and pull it up. There we go. Go for from the beginning. Right, okay, that's great, but am I sharing it? Minimize back out. Oh, how does Nigel Marshall do this? Share that. Okay, and then begin from current slide. Okay, right. Very briefly, guys, can you see that? Can you, not the PowerPoint thing, but can you see the actual presentation? Can you see the welcome to on the screen there? Can you confirm you could see that before I start continuing? Yes? Excellent stuff. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, so let me move that back over here. And then I can clear up that screen. There we are. So it's a bit on the messy side. Just making sure that I can also let people in. There we go. I've got that screen back up. I'm working from two monitors, so hence the confusion. Okay, so there we are. So welcome. Let me just get that off the screen. Yeah. So obviously, what telescope should I get presented and narrated by me? Hi. Done this already, so I'm not going to go through that again with you. Okay, so essentially this presentation is about what telescope should I get? And it has to be said, it's one of the most common questions that gets asked by people coming into astronomy. And the answer to that is it really depends on what you want. It really depends on what you want to do with it, what you want to see with it. There's all different shapes and sizes. There's different shapes and models out there, which we are going to take on. But one thing I've said there is no one shoe size fits all. This really does depend on what your needs are. So what you're not going to walk away from here is with, you need to get this telescope, you need to get that one, you need to get that one. What I'm going to give you tonight is the information you need to make your own decision. Obviously, clearly afterwards, if you want some pointers on, if you found a particular link and you need some advice, then obviously let me know. And I'd rather you did that if you weren't so sure, because there's a lot of rubbish out there. I've just accidentally hit with the mouse, but it's taking me onto the next screen. Deciding on the right telescopes, we must consider the cost, obviously your budget. And if you're asking me about telescopes, I'll always say, how much money have you got to spend on it? Because obviously, the more money, the bigger the telescope and the more bells and whistles you can get. Physical size, that's a very good point, physical size. Now, you can go for something like that. If you can see it, there you go for something like that, which is a standard, very beginner's telescope, or something pretty massive, which if I had the means, I would show you, but I've got a 10-inch Dobsonian out there in the cupboard under the stairs, guys, and I paid £1,000 for that. And it's been used, I can count on one hand how many times it's been used. And the reason for that, it is so cumbersome to move it. I've got it on the trolley dolly. I have to wheel it out because it is that heavy. So again, physical size, that's limited by using that telescope. That setup, that's another thing to consider. Are you going to get one like a Dobsonian, which is quite light? You can plop it down and take a look. What's a Dobsonian? We'll come to that later. There's other more complicated ones where you can have it aligned to the pole star, which takes a bit more time. So it depends on what your mileage is there, and your ability to set a telescope up. Which, to be fair, the more you practice, the quicker you get. I mean, with my setup, some of you have seen it. I have got that down to a T now. I could do it in about 45 minutes and take it down in about the same. And what do you want to use it for? Now, that's the big question. What do you want to use it for? So it usually comes down to several categories now. You've got planets, you've got the moon. So these are the brighter objects. And then you want to go into what we call DSOs, or deep space objects. These are galaxies, these are nebulae, which are great to see, but they're further away. And, obviously, clearly we might need different types of telescope to see those. But also, we always say too, consider a good pair of binoculars. And I happen to have my trusty pair here that I have had for well over 30 years. I've had these since I was knee high to a grasshopper, making sure you can see those, even though that the what's it's been sort of phased out. But so you can see them here. So these are my binoculars. These are 7x50s, and I was bought. They cost £90 at the time from Broadhurst, Clarkston, Fuller, and these were pretty much the. I was proud as punch to have them because they were 7x50. That means they magnify 7 times, and the aperture of the lens is 50 millimeters. And it was the late Sir Patrick Moore who recommended 7x50, so it had to be 7x50. And here they are. You won't buy them like that now, I don't think. But, nice swanky leather case. Yeah, it's a. Ask me what my most treasured possession is. It's these. My dear mother bought me those. And it's something that I've cherished ever since. A bit dusty now. I must confess I don't really use them myself because my eyesight's deteriorated, but you can always start with these. So binoculars are always a good place to start. Let me move on to the next slide, which probably gets into a bit more on that. Good. So they're ideal for stargazing, and there's a wealth of things you can see with binoculars. So things like the Seven Sisters star cluster M45 that's becoming available, and that's a good binocular object. Obviously, the moon is a good binocular object. You can still see the craters with a good pair of binoculars. And also, again, about this time of the year, you've got Orion rising, the Great Orion Nebula, and you can see that with a pair of binoculars. And even with the naked eye, you can see these objects. Pardon me, the Andromeda Spiral is another one, the M31 in the constellation of Andromeda. So if you follow Cassiopeia down from its left wing, left sort of the W, you can meet that. So binoculars, don't underestimate them. They can still show you plenty. And if you're not so sure about astronomy, if you're going to stay or if you're going to go, then at least a pair of binoculars will be used for other things. You can take them, if you're into bird watching, or if you like nature, or if you like to go to the beach and look at ships passing by, they can be used for those as well. Whereas with a telescope, if you go and spend money on that and you decide later it's not for you, you're pretty limited in what you can do with a telescope. So something to consider. Cost. Telescopes can be expensive. And as I said, we've already said, if you're not so sure about going into the hobby, that go for the binoculars first. But the good news is now with telescopes, in contrast to when I was a young boy, telescopes have come down from when they're about £500 down to about 150, and you can get a decent 70 millimeter equatorial for now. Celestron does one. It's a 70AQ Astromaster. I usually have one behind me, but it's more than my marriage is, I think, to set that up because of obvious reasons. But that's a good telescope to use, and it's also got a decent red spot finder on that as well. And we'll get to what a finder is. But note what I've said there, guys. The best telescope is the one you actually use. It's the telescope you take out. It's the telescope you plonk down, the one you look through, the one you see things, and you enjoy the heavens. I started with a 70 millimeter Altazimuth, and it was one that my mother bought me from Argus. Keep mentioning my mother, don't I? Most important lady in my life there. But she bought me that telescope from Argus, and I tell you what, it was beautiful. Loved it, and I got my first view of the moon with that. Saw Mars. Mars had come to opposition years ago, and I managed to see that. We went camping especially as well that year. and I managed to see that, the belts of Jupiter. I was hooked, and that was just on a 70mm refractor, just on the humble altazimuth mount. We'll see more about what that is later, and absolutely loved it. I would gladly have passed it on to somebody, but unfortunately it got nicked. But anyway, so that's pretty much it. And I will reiterate again, there is no one size fits all. Even I use more than one telescope for the work I do, for reasons I'll come to. Okay, aperture. Okay, we discussed this in the night sky module of Space Cadets, and I hasten to add I have now upgraded the night sky. So there's more in it. And I've also written a book, would you believe, on how to use an astronomical telescope. That's been uploaded a bit like the Space Cadets Guide to the Night Sky, because I don't easily find ways to publish these things, so I'd rather give it away and have it sit on my desk, my hard drive. Anyway, so the larger the aperture or lens or mirror, the more the light the telescope can see. Now, if you're unsure about that, when it's raining, take a cup, put it outside, and then get a bowl and put it outside. Which one's going to harvest the most water? It's obviously going to be the bowl. It's got a bigger, wider area, so it can capture more water than that. So if water is now photons of light that's coming from outer space, so the bigger the mirror or the bigger the lens you have, the more light you can gather, and therefore the fainter the object you can see. Now that's great, but unfortunately with increased kind of size becomes two problems: the cost and the weight. Those two things start to come into play, but we'll take a look at that going forward. So aperture is quite important. Physical size, guys. Okay, I did say about that Dobsonian that weighed a ton out there, didn't I? Well, there it is right here. There it is. And the reason why is just a truss tube. So this gets pulled up, and you can't see that too easily here, but that actually gets pulled up by a fair old bit. And this is actually motorized. I could have gone and bought the unmotorized version. It would have been lighter and easier to move, but I decided to go for the motorized version. And then there's this one over here that's covered over. Now, for those of you that have seen me, set up, and I've got the two telescopes, Molly and William, there's the setup there. In fact, looking at that, I'd say I don't think either mounted on there at that time. I mean, there isn't at the moment, but usually I've got a telescope kind of underneath that cover. For me, the one I use the most, which one do you think it is? That one or that one? That one weighs a ton, but I just carry that out and set it up. This one over here, well, it's a bit of a pain getting it out from underneath there. And it's even got you probably can't see it there, but it's even got a slight kind of trolley underneath. And I have a rod that I can pull it with. It is that heavy. It really is. That's a 10-inch mirror in there. And I've got a bit of a problem with it too, in that my little girl, I believe, had a look. She'd been having some chocolate mousse, and she dribbled some of that down onto the mirror. Yeah, I didn't catch her doing it, but I saw like brown stains on it on the side, and I thought, is that coffee? Then I thought, no, I believe my daughter's dribbled on that. It's just me being Sherlock Holmes, but there you go. So as I say here, the telescope should be easy to handle and set up. Portability may also be a bonus. Now this one here is portable. That's why I've kind of bought that, because it could be collapsed down and put into a car, taken to a star party. This, on the other hand, is absolutely not portable. It weighs a ton, probably why nobody's tried to nick it yet. But that there underneath there is a metal pillar. You don't go rushing out to buy one of those, guys. I've got one because I've been in the game for 35 plus years and I wanted a semi-permanent setup. You, on the other hand, will go for something a bit simpler. My point is, though, both of those are bulky setups. Physical size very important. So consider that when you're buying a big Dobsonian. And I will say with Dobsonians, you probably get better bang for the buck from them too, as they say. They're a very popular kind of telescope to go for. But equally, the biggest one is storage, where you're going to put the thing when it's not in use. So that's consider. And so set up, I think I've gone into a bit more detail here now. And you can see that Dobsonian there that I was talking about. So that's it set up down there. and that's it all kind of ready to go. What I'm probably doing here is a thing called collimation, and probably also aligning the finder that you can see here. This one, on the other hand, is slightly smaller, and that's what we call the Astromaster 70 AZ, because it's on an altazimuth mount. That's an equatorial mount there. This is an altaz. Altaz is just up, down, left and right. No setup to it really. Don't worry about where the pole is. Just put it down, set up, bingo. And that's fine for visual stuff if that's what you want. But you can't easily track any objects with it. That's the problem. So what have I said here? Yeah. Equatorial mounts are more complicated. You do have to make sure you've leveled the tripod, and you also have to make sure that you've got it aligned to the pole, which isn't that hard for that type of telescope. And for those of you on Space Cadets, I have got tutorials on that. So that is kind of the thing. Also consider time taken to put it away if you cannot leave it out. So security as well. So if you're thinking about leaving your telescope out for the night, A, think of the weather, and B, think of security. Is it likely to be there in the morning? Me, I'm quite lucky. Enclosed garden. Neighbours think I'm a peeping Tom sort of thing. Well, they would, wouldn't they? But equally at the same time, yeah, I haven't had any problems yet. And I've got a Ring doorbell. So it's my dog over there. A Ring doorbell that keeps constant monitor over my stuff anyway. So that kind of helps. Right, so that is set up. So generally speaking, there's three types of telescope to consider, usually for amateurs. You have the refractor. So there's your refractor up here, that one there. Then you've got your reflector. That includes that one there. That's the Dobsonian, or the Newtonian, as it's sometimes called. So you've got your mirror, you've got your secondary mirror up there. Light comes down, reflects off of the primary onto the secondary and into your eyes, so you can see. And you've got a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope. So the reason I've put that there, and it's not a very big picture, is that sitting on top of my mount is a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope. And I won't go into details of why that's different now, because I've got more material to cover that. But essentially, these are the three types of telescope now we are going to be looking at for you. So refractors then. So here's a few flavors. You've got the 70 AZ I mentioned down there. So, it's pretty much the same type of tube. Incidentally, if you ever hear the term optical tube assembly or OTA, they mean just the tube, that there. Not this business. That's what we call the mount. So the mount is basically what holds the tube and connects it to the tripod down here. So it's just some terms for you. So you can see here we've got your altazimuth mount and your equatorial here. The equatorial is a bit more complicated. I've got no idea what that banging is. I don't think I'm that loud. The equatorial is a bit more complicated to set up, but I'm not going to discuss how or why here because I've got more material on that. So there's your refractor. So your refractor is essentially your tube. Light comes down. It is essentially focused. And then you put your eyepiece in and it essentially magnifies up the focused light that's come through from the objective lens. So there's the objective lens. The aperture is defined by this area here. So that's an important figure to always keep in mind, is what the aperture is. For the telescopes here, they're typically 70 millimeters of aperture. And the wider you can get, 80 millimeters, 90 millimeters, price will go up, but technically speaking, you can see fainter objects with it. Focal length, that's the distance from where the lens is to where the light focuses. So you'll often be given that information on the side of the tube. And the eyepiece as well, which you then put in to magnify that light. That's essentially how a refractor works. These telescopes are generally quite easy to use, low maintenance, as long as you keep the lenses clean. Not a lot can go wrong with the refractor. I love refractors. They're great telescopes. Refractors, sorry, still on that. So I think I said earlier on, so I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but you can see the planets. So essentially by that, with Mars, when it's quite close up, you can see the dark areas. And then you can see with Jupiter, you can see the Galilean moons quite clearly with it. You can see the belts of Jupiter as well. And you can see the Great Red Spot on Jupiter. So you can see quite a fair amount of detail on these planets. And obviously Saturn, you can see the rings. And with the moon, you can also see the craters quite clearly. And obviously brighter galaxies, I think I mentioned the Andromeda Spiral M31, some clusters of nebulae as well. I think I mentioned M42, the Great Orion Nebula, is easily visible in a small society. I thought my dog was chewing something there. It's kind of the Labrador cross, just making sure it's not chewing the remote. But yeah, those are the key things you can see with a refractor. And to be honest with you, if you've got a lot of light pollution, that might be the best telescope for you to go for. And they're quite easy to store, easy to put in the boot of the car if you're going camping. So that is refractor for you. Oh, okay. Pros and cons. Okay, yes, you think I did write it really. So pros: simple to use, lower maintenance, generally cheaper, which is true. Ideal for brighter objects, we've already said, and intrinsically lighter. The cons: higher apertures cost are more expensive. So if you want to go to 5-6 inches in a refractor to be able to view the deeper sky, the fainter objects, that's going to cost a lot more money. And the lens gets heavier as well the bigger it gets. Yeah, I've covered that there. Not so good for fainter objects, can be awkward. Yeah, awkward bending down for the eyepiece. That's why you've got your star diagonal down there. And for that purpose, you should be fine with it if you just look down through the star diagonal. But if you lose it, or for whatever reason, you then end up having to bend down and crook your neck. And even so, if the telescope's quite low down, then you're going to be bending down quite low to see it. And that is one problem with refractors. It's the awkward positioning you get with them. And poor star diagonals can give you ghost images. So what that means is usually inside them, I think I might have one here. Have I? Sure I do. Yeah, okay. So you go. It's a star diagonal. If you can see that, can you? There you go. So inside of that is a prism. So light gets reflected in and out through the prism. Cheaper ones use a mirror. I kid you not. And you've got mirror inside. And if you ever looked at the mirror, you'll always see that there's almost like a double reflection, because the reflective part is put on the back of the mirror, not on the front, obviously to protect the silver surface. But that's fine for a cosmetic mirror. But for astronomy, it means you get double reflection, which means you get ghosting. So for every star you see, there's another one next to it. So I met that once with that telescope I showed you. It wasn't fun. That made a fool of me to begin with, because I thought every single star I was looking at was a double star. Well, I mean, I was 13 and only just gotten into it at the time. So I guess I can be forgiven. But yeah, so that's pretty much what we're looking at with that one. What time are we at? We're doing okay, I think. Reflectors. Now, these are the types that people like to go for, because they're intrinsically bigger telescopes. You're not going to find too many 60-70 millimeter reflectors about. Here's one here that's quite a good beginner's level. What you can see here is obviously it's an open end this time. You haven't got the lens, and then you've got like a vane thing here holding the central pod where you've got your secondary mirror. My dog's just about to jump up onto me. And essentially what you've got here is your primary mirror slats coming down, reflecting off of there onto the secondary mirror, into the eyepiece. And you've got your red spot finder there. So with the red spot finder, what it is, it's like a finder, and you've got an LED light, and it projects it up onto a screen for you. And that's what you align over the object. And that's how you find your object. So rather than having the crosshairs that you get with a standard finder, that's what you now have. And that's a lot easier to use when it's dark. This thing, people are talking about them, and that's a SynScan handset, which I happen to have over here. Really can't I would have pulled everything across so I didn't keep getting it up. And there we are. And here it is. So handset like that, and essentially you type in here what you want to see, and that essentially sends it off to a computer, and off it goes. You've also got to align with it, but it's a bit of computerized work if you so need it. So my dog's kind of wandered down. Come along, Teddy. Okay. No, not in there, lovely. Not in there. Good girl, good girl. Right, so that is that. And I've pretty much You must forgive me when I come to these PowerPoints. To me, they're more of a prompt, but I have this annoying habit of getting ahead of them sometimes, and I've done it right here. But at least you can sort of see that there visually of how a reflector works, rather than me doing hand signals here. So you've got your primary mirror, as we saw before. So light comes down, reflects off of that, off of the secondary mirror, and up to the eyepiece. That line there, that represents a beam of light coming through. So that's essentially what you've got. So your secondary mirror is pretty much what that is there, and your primary mirror is at the base end there. And that's essentially how that works. So yeah, I borrowed that from WikiCommons. I actually think since I've sketched my own. Right, so what are the pros then for a reflector? Well, they're cheaper, the greater aperture. They are a lot cheaper. Therefore, you can view fainter objects with them. Less awkward to observe with, and that's because the eyepiece is at the side, as you saw, rather than at the end of the telescope. No colour fringes. I won't get into many details about that, but we're dealing with mirrors here, not lenses. So you're less likely to have any focal issues there. The cons are mirrors are fragile. Yes, they are fragile. So always be careful with the mirror not to get anything like chocolate mousse on it, like I have. Keep the dust cap on and keep it clean when not in use. But don't worry about every fleck and every bit of dust that ends up on the mirror, because you are going to get that. It only becomes a problem when it becomes so caked with the stuff that it upsets and starts interfering with your view. So it's something to keep in mind there. Hard to clean mirrors? Don't unless you have to. Need collimation. Okay, collimation. Very briefly, let's pick back to collimation. Collimation is all about the alignment of the lenses, of the mirrors. So what that basically means is that has got to be spot on. If that's slightly off at an angle, that focal point could be up here, could be down there, could be slightly off. And what that means is, even though you may see the object through the eyepiece, you will not easily focus. And it might not be apparent at a lower magnification, but as you bump it up and bump it up and bump it up, you will notice that. And you won't easily be able to focus. So collimation is very important. There is a collimation laser you can get, and essentially what you do is you pop it down the eyepiece, and it sends a laser beam down to your secondary mirror, up, sort of back down off of your second. Yeah, I got that right. Down onto the primary mirror, and then back up. So basically, if it's collimated, it follows the one path, down and up. Therefore, nothing to do. If it's slightly off, then you've got to adjust some knobs to correct that. And that is one problem with reflecting telescopes. And I will say now, with my big Dobsonian, it is a right real pain. And a big reason why I don't like using reflectors. They take practice, and if you're careful after a while, I need water. You should not need to do it too often. But keep in mind, if you're going to go and buy yourself a reflecting telescope, it might be advisable to get a collimator, a collimating laser. Not really the time to go into detail about that now, but if you need more information on that, then I've got it to give. And often, yeah, open tube. So why is that a problem? Condensation can get in. Yeah, that can be a pain on the mirror. You can get fans to keep that off. Not a problem if I'm using a refractor or my Schmidt-Cassegrain you saw earlier, because I can use heated tube bands there, and it's the heat from those that keeps off the condensation, but you can't have that easily for this. Bulky, absolutely it is. Very bulky and often heavy, which is two big reasons why I don't use my big Dobsonian very often. So things to consider when getting a reflector. Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope. Some of you may have seen these, and many people I know have upgraded to them. They're intrinsically bigger, they're computerized, and some of them are portable. They go up to about 8 inches of aperture, so measuring across the mirror there. And what you've got there's your corrector plate, and you've got your secondary mirror behind that. And essentially the light comes in, reflects off the primary mirror down here, back up to that one, and then back down to your eyepiece or camera. Yes, you could argue it's a reflecting telescope. Yes, but it's not a Newtonian. It's a different design. But a lot of people are going with these. Their features are both refractors and reflectors. Yes, we said that. You view at the other end. So the focus of that is actually at the bottom end of the telescope down there. These are good all-round telescopes for planets and deep sky. I love mine for planets and for the moon, and you can get very close up with these. But for anything wider field, like if you're looking at the great Andromeda spiral, for example, you may well struggle to get everything in that. But I mean, it's a lovely all-round telescope. You'll get great views of the planets through that. And the bonuses as well with it is it will auto guide. So you use that handset there, like I showed you, and essentially you align against 3 stars with this. So you need to know your stars. But once you've done that, that thing is configured to, boldly go where you've never seen before, so to speak. So it's a very good telescope. As I said, it can be limited field of view when using it. I've kind of already gone through that, but you can see the graphical representation now. So there's your corrector plate. Light's coming through it. The corrector plate helps to adjust the light slightly, hits the main mirror, back up to the secondary mirror, which is curved, and then sends the light back down to the eyepiece. And you've got a hole in the mirror now, in the center where the light focuses. So that's essentially how that works. Pros and cons. Well, pros are it is cheaper for greater aperture. So if you wanted to get an 8-inch one of those, it is cheaper. But when you compare the same thing for a refractor, view fainter objects, color fringes, nil. Good fresh ray photography. Yeah, you can put a camera at the end and you can take pictures. Good all-round telescope. Yeah, I mean, it's probably quite good if you're interested in close water stuff. Sealed tube, yes. A sealed tube basically means you're not going to get anything in it. Provided you don't leave your eyepiece out of the rear end for a while, you're not going to get any midges or spiders crawling in there. You think I'm joking? I've had a fly land it into my corrector plate. That's why I had to clear it 10 years later. I couldn't reconcile the goo inside. That thing didn't, it lasted a bit flying around in there. That thing that you don't want. That's why you keep them sealed. Not so easy with the Newtonian. Refractors are obviously sealed units, but anyway, it's a sealed tube. Cons, yes, collimation again is an issue with that telescope. Shouldn't be too bad, but collimation can be a problem. Bulky, yes, they are. Heavy, oh, absolutely, very heavy. It's anything probably over, say, 6 inches. 8 inches is going to be a bit of a challenge, so make sure you can carry it. Prone to condensation, yes, they are. And what you might want to do would be to get invest in a heat band to go around there. You can get them, and that helps keep the condensation up. Otherwise, a hairdryer. I've used a hairdryer. The only problem with that is that whirring at 3 in the morning might upset the neighbours, but it does work. But that's why I use that thing called dew bands. I have them somewhere, but that involves getting back up, and I don't know quite where I've put them. But yeah, so mounts. Okay, yeah, okay. Mounts then. So you got our Altazimuth, which I've already discussed, Equatorial and Dobsonian. So kind of already glazed over those. So that's your simple Altaz. Up, down, left and right, pretty much, and then you've got a bolt to sight off. Fantastic idea, and if you're just looking to stargaze, great. But bearing in mind the Earth does rotate, so if you get it in there and focus it, then the Earth is going to rotate and you're going to lose it. You have to keep on going after it. So that's the only real kind of problem with that sort of mount. They're not generally motor driven. And there's the pros. So yes, they're easy to operate, good for stargazing. I started off with one of those. They're great if that's all you want. And yeah, the cons don't have long to view. I've already said that. Easy knocked off target, or you're not joking. I mean, just a slight thing in it and you've lost it. Prone to wind, yes, it is. You get it on the object, and the actual object is moving around like a tadpole. That bad. So having to wait for that to settle down before you see it, and the thing drifts out of the way. So you can tolerate it for a while, but you're going to have these problems. Time to stabilize. Yeah, well, I've said that. Cannot fit drive. So by that, I mean you can't put any motor on it to kind of automate the tracking for you. So that's that. Equatorial is pretty much this here. So you've got it aligned to the pole, and that's where you align it to the pole up here. So you'd use these bolts back and forward to push that up and down, and you'd loosen down just to get it going slightly left and right. Counterweight here is to balance the weight up here. So two things you need to worry about is balancing the telescope along here. That's why you've got these circles. You can loosen the bolts and move that up and down. And this counterweight balances the whole telescope. If you don't balance it and it's too heavy on either way, that's going to be the problem. You're going to have to, it's going to put too much strain on and you're not going to enjoy it. And I've gone off target again, haven't I? Has to be aligned to the pole star. Yes, what you need to do, guys, is get the mount, that part there, leveled. You can use a spirit level for that. And then you put the mount on. This here is what I call the mount, all that there. That's the tripod. This is the mount. And there is the main tube, or the optical tube assembly, as we call it. And essentially what you want to do is get that balanced across here, that balanced across here, and then get the pole star nicely aligned up here. You could do that by literally pointing it north and then using just simply those up and down bolts, and then moving the whole assembly until you can see the pole star probably through your finder, and then it should be in here, and then you can lock that all off, and then you are polar aligned. Just have to make sure you kind of lock. You don't have to go through all the tiers everybody else does to polar align one of those. But what it should mean after, you should only have to really move one of those bolts, that one, to get it to move through. It's only really one movement to worry about when you've got it polarized. So it is worth spending time doing it. I have got more videos on that in Space Cadets for how to polar align. I don't want to get into too much detail here because we're looking at how to choose a telescope. Yeah, so very briefly, equatorial mounts, simple and easy to store. Will allow for easier tracking of objects. It's easy to follow them. More stable, so they're a bit heavier, and therefore less easy to knock. That doesn't mean that they're immune to it, but it's harder. Cons: they are more expensive. They're a complicated setup. Need to balance the tube as discussed. Mount needs to be polar aligned, as we briefly discussed. Can be heavy because you've got the mount. The weight, can be more bulky, I suppose, because you've got the weight as well, and a bit more, well, we said complicated, but yeah, not meaning to scare you off, but if you fancy having a go at that, you've got Local Astronomy Society to help you. That is worth the punt. Dobsonian, here it is. So mine is in there, and I'll put a picture of probably the more likely the more practical model you will go for there. That there is not motor driven. There is no handset. I mean, actually, that is the handset for this. So yeah, that's why it's intrinsically heavier. This doesn't have one. You've just simply got a kind of a handle underneath that, and you can move it kind of around, and it's really quite smooth. Beautiful telescope. Nice finder there too. I'm going to give you some idea. Oh, this is the finder. It's easy to bring a little telescope. This is the finder for that telescope. If you could see that just about, yeah, sort of. Don't know where the focus for that is, but anyway, it's in the pictures. So the Dobsonian, generally speaking, is a good all-round telescope, and even though that is not motor driven, all you need to do is align the finder. That's all you need to do, and you can do that against a TV aerial or something like that in the day. And all you need to do is when you move the telescope, what you see through the small telescope or the finder, you see through the big one. And literally, once you've got it set up, that should be good to go. And all you need to do is take it out, plonk it down, and go for it. That is how simple that is. It's really is a plug and play telescope. And the good thing about these is you can get a 10-inch one of those, which would be a great light bucket, but also reasonably good for planets. And they're not that expensive. I think about £500 now. I've seen them around for. That one over there, that's about £1,000. That one there's a lot cheaper. That's motor driven. That's why that one's not. So I think Dobsonians, by and large, if you're just looking for something to stargaze, may well be the best kind of telescope. But again, it depends on what what your mileage is. Don't forget it's still bulky. I mean, this is a Dobsonian here of sorts, same kind of mount. Again, you can't really see that, can you? But keep forgetting I've blurred my background there. Okay. So yeah, so I'm going to just go through these. I think I've already covered most of them. Yeah, I've already covered most of these. I'm conscious of the time. Conclusion: choosing a telescope could be like choosing a car. There is no one shoe size fits all. This presentation was about advising you about what's out there and what is best, which kind of objects. There are other things to consider. I mean, I haven't mentioned focal length, I haven't mentioned focal ratio, and these things have a bearing as well on the type of telescope you go for. But at the end of the day, as I've said, that the best telescope is the one you use. There's no point in spending a fortune on something and never using it. If you spend £150 on one, it's a lot cheaper, a lot smaller, but you use it. That's the best telescope to use. I'd tell you now, I've actually got two telescopes I use. One that's got a wider field of view for using it. That's the refractor you've seen me use. And then there's my other one, Molly, which is the Schmidt Cassegrain, and that one has a more narrower field of view. So if I'm interested in planets and galaxies, I'll go for the big one you saw there. If I'm looking for wider field nebulae, things which take up more space in the sky, more spread out, that's when I go for my refractor. But that is essentially it. I won't go through the quiz with you. I think I put that in more for my space cadets. I just really wanted to give you that as an idea. I think very briefly what I'll show you too is another thing I set up which could be useful for you. Let me go to my, let me stop share for a minute and then go to my OneNote and show you a few things here. So yeah, this is a bit more of a representation of polar alignment. So this is where we're polar aligning. So that's something which might help clarify things a bit more. Also here, I've sketched these out, but this is pretty much what you might see. You'll get a series of eyepieces, usually 25 millimeter, 12.5 millimeter, 7 millimeter. It's got that on the side. I don't know if I've got anything here like it to show you. I do, but getting it up here to focus is quite another matter. But you can see here that you've got the size indication on the side. That what that is, it's the focal length of the eyepiece where that focuses. And essentially, the smaller the number on there, so the 7 millimeter, for example, is going to be higher magnification than the higher number. So 25 millimeter will be the lowest power, as I've said there, and the 7 millimeter will be the highest power. And the reason why they put the millimeter on there instead of what the magnification is because it varies from telescope to telescope. So you take your focal length of the telescope and divide it by that number, and that gives you the magnification. And that is essentially what I wanted to show you there. Well, yeah, here very briefly as well, this is how you align a finder. So you can see your telescope there is looking at the aerial, and we're looking at the aerial here on the house. So essentially what you want to do is get that middle part at the end there into the center field of view of the telescope, and then lock it off. And then with your finder on the crosshairs, you want to get that onto the crosshairs. And there's usually three, dare show you one, that's probably won't be able to get it. There's usually 3 buttons on the bracket you can turn to get it centered. I have got videos on those, and that's essentially how you do it. And when you're going to observe an object for the first time, start off with the lowest power eyepiece first. So in this case, from what we're looking at here, you'll be putting the 25 millimeter in, not the 7. Most telescopes now come with a reasonably low power and a kind of a mid-range power, the 12.5. The Barlow lens there that you see magnifies things twice, so it doubles the magnification. So you probably maybe use that for planets, but higher magnification doesn't always mean a better image, but that's a story for another time. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, time's 10:02. That's pretty much all I wanted to say on this, and I hope you found that informative. I'm now going to stop sharing, stop recording, and as if I have been recording. And yeah, so I'm going to stop share, and I'm going to stop recording, and I'm going to throw it open to questions. So there we are.